On a cold morning back in early March, a 2024 Camry rolled into my bay with 38,000 miles on the clock and a frustrated owner behind the wheel. He had a printed forum thread in his hand, 3 highlighted paragraphs, and a single question. Is the oil Toyota wants me to use actually destroying my engine? He was not crazy. He was not paranoid. He was reading what thousands of mechanics have been quietly arguing about for the last 2 years. And by the time I lifted the hood, I already knew exactly what conversation we were about to have. Today, I am revealing the real story behind Toyota's new 0W-8 motor oil. Why so many seasoned technicians refuse to put it in their own vehicles, and the part Toyota engineered into the oil that almost no driver has ever heard of. Stick with me, because what is actually happening inside these engines is far more nuanced than the YouTube panic videos suggest, and far more concerning than the dealership service writers will ever tell you. If you walk into a Toyota dealership today and ask what oil goes in your new Corolla, RAV4 Hybrid, Camry Hybrid, or Crown, the answer increasingly comes back as 0W-8. That number alone makes most older mechanics flinch. For decades we ran 5W30, then 5W20, then 0W20, then 0W16, each step thinner, each step quieter, and now 0W8, an oil so thin you can pour it like cooking sherry. Hold a bottle of 0W8 next to a bottle of 5W30 and watch them both tilt. The 5W30 hesitates. The 0W8 obeys gravity instantly. That difference is not cosmetic. That difference is the entire fight. The first thing you need to understand is what those numbers actually mean, because the marketing copy never explains it honestly. The second number, the one after the W, is what the oil viscosity looks like at full operating temperature. A 0W8 oil has a kinematic viscosity of around 5.8 centistokes at 100 degrees Celsius. A traditional 5W30 sits between 9.3 and 12.5 centistokes. So 0W8 is roughly half the thickness of the oil your father ran in his Camry 20 years ago. Half. And here is where it gets genuinely interesting, because viscosity at 100 degrees Celsius is not the number that scares mechanics. The number that scares mechanics is HTHS. HTHS stands for high temperature, high shear viscosity. It is measured at 150 degrees Celsius, simulating the extreme conditions inside your bearings, your piston rings, your cam lobes, the places where 2 metal surfaces are trying to ride on a microscopic cushion of oil that is being squeezed and ripped apart thousands of times per minute. The SAE specification requires 0W20 oil to maintain at least 2.6 millipascal seconds of HTHS viscosity. The 0W16 specification dropped that to 2.3 millipascal seconds. The new 0W8 specification dropped it again to 1.7 millipascal seconds. That is not a small number on a chart. That is a 35% reduction in the oil's ability to hold itself together inside a hot, fast, loaded bearing compared to the 0W20 your engine probably ran a decade ago. And every mechanic who has ever pulled apart a worn engine and looked at scuffed bearing shells understands instantly what that number implies. Now, before the comments fill up with people screaming that I am fear-mongering, I want to be honest about the other side of this story, because Toyota's engineers are not idiots. They did not just dump water into engines and hope nobody noticed. The 0W8 specification was developed alongside a completely new approach to lubrication, and that approach is the part the dealership never explains. Here is what is actually happening. For the last 100 years, engines have relied on something called hydrodynamic lubrication. The oil pump pushes pressurized oil into the bearing clearances, and the spinning crankshaft and camshafts essentially aquaplane on a wedge of oil. Higher viscosity equals a thicker wedge, and that means more separation between metal surfaces. This is why older engines specified thick oil. They had loose tolerances, and they needed that big oil cushion to keep the crank from kissing the bearing shells. But modern Toyota engines, especially the M20A and A25A dynamic force engines, are built to tolerances that older engineers would consider absurd. The bearing clearances are tighter. The piston-to-wall clearances are tighter. The valve train geometry is optimized for low friction. Inside these engines, you do not need a thick oil to maintain hydrodynamic separation. A thin oil is enough, at least under normal driving conditions. But that is not all Toyota did. The 0W-8 specification, formalized as JASOGLV1, requires specific friction, reducing additives that older oils never had to carry. Toyota's own published research describes adding what they call an oil film former, a chemistry that bonds to metal surfaces and creates a microscopic protective layer independent of oil thickness. They also enhanced the use of molybdenum dithiocarbamate, MODTC, and added calcium borate detergent to make that molybdenum work even harder under boundary conditions. In simple terms, the engineers said, yes, the oil is thinner, so we will compensate by chemically gluing a wear-resistant film to every metal surface, so that even when the oil cushion fails, the engine still has a layer of protection. This is what is technically called boundary lubrication, and it is the piece almost nobody in the YouTube outrage videos talks about. Toyota did not just cheat on viscosity. They shifted the entire strategy of how the engine survives. So why are mechanics still concerned? Why am I still concerned? Because chemistry has limits. Because boundary protection only works when the additives are healthy. And because the moment your driving conditions step outside the narrow window the engineers designed for, that thin oil and that chemical film start working harder than they were ever meant to. This is the part that matters. If you bought a Corolla hybrid, drive it in stop-and-go suburban traffic, never tow anything, never run high RPMs for long periods, change your oil on schedule with the correct genuine 0W-8, and live in a temperate climate, the engineering math works. The data backs it up. There are owners with 200,000 miles on 0W-8 with oil analysis reports showing wear metals well within normal limits. Toyota is not lying when they say these engines are designed for this oil. Within that envelope, it works. But the moment you step outside that envelope, the margin disappears fast. Towing a small trailer up a long grade in summer heat? Your oil temperature climbs past 240, 250, sometimes 260 degrees Fahrenheit. At those temperatures, an oil with 1.7 millipascal seconds, HTHS, is operating right at the edge of its protective ability. The chemical film helps, but boundary lubrication generates heat itself, and as the additives deplete with mileage, that protective layer thins. Sustained high RPM driving, like long highway runs in a 2-liter Corolla turning 3,000 RPM at 80 miles per hour for hours, accelerates additive depletion. Short trips that never let the engine fully reach operating temperature cause fuel dilution, which thins an already thin oil further. And this is where the long-term picture starts to look uncertain. I have seen owners come in with 2-year-old hybrids that already have measurable timing chain stretch. I have seen variable valve timing actuators throwing codes at 60,000 miles in engines that should have gone 200,000 miles without complaint. I cannot prove these failures are caused by 0W-8 specifically. Engines are complex and 100 variables matter, but I can tell you that the patterns concern me, and they concern a lot of independent shops who are seeing the same things. We are watching real-world data accumulate in real time, and the fleet is still young. The 200,000-mile reports you see online are mostly from owners who babied their cars and used premium boutique oils. The fleet average is going to look different. There is another piece of this story that nobody talks about, and it has nothing to do with engineering. It has to do with regulation. The push toward 0W-8 is not driven by a sudden breakthrough in lubrication science. It is driven by corporate average fuel economy standards in the United States and equivalent regulations in Japan and Europe. The improvement Toyota measured between 0W-16 and 0W-8 was 0.8% in fuel economy, less than 1%. That tiny gain, multiplied across millions of vehicles, is enough to help Toyota meet emissions targets, avoid penalties, and continue selling profitable SUVs and trucks under their fleet average. Every car company is doing the same thing. The question is whether that 0.8% fuel economy improvement is worth the long-term wear margin you are giving up. Toyota's bet is yes. Some of us are not so sure. First, find out exactly what your owner's manual specifies. Many of the cars labeled for 0W-8 also list 0W-16 as an acceptable substitute. And on some models, 0W-20 is also approved if 0W-16 is not available. Read the manual yourself. Do not trust the dealer's reminder sticker. The sticker is often wrong, sometimes specifying 0W-16 because the shop has not stocked 0W-8 yet. If your manual lists 0W-8 as the primary specification but allows 0W-16 as a backup, you have flexibility, and that flexibility is your friend. Second, if you tow, drive aggressively, live in extreme heat, or plan to keep the car past 150,000 miles, seriously consider stepping up to 0W-16 or even 0W-20 within the manufacturer's allowed range. Yes, you will lose a fraction of a mile per gallon. Yes, your engine may take a tiny hair longer to circulate oil on a cold start. But the high temperature, high shear margin you gain back is meaningful protection in the conditions where it actually matters. I have several customers running 0W-16 in vehicles that came with 0W-8 from the factory, with the manufacturer's blessing as a listed alternate, and their oil analysis numbers look excellent. Third, and this is the part most people miss, oil quality matters more than viscosity grade right now. A premium 0W-8 with a full synthetic base oil and a robust additive package will outperform a budget 0W-16 every day of the week. If you are committed to running 0W-8 because your manual specifies it, do not buy whatever is cheapest at the parts store. Buy genuine Toyota 0W-8 or a top-tier synthetic from a reputable manufacturer that actually meets the JASOGLV1 specification. The chemistry is what is keeping your engine alive between bearing surfaces. Cheaping out on the chemistry is how you turn a borderline situation into a real failure. Fourth, change your oil more often than the maintenance minder tells you. Toyota's recommended interval on these engines is often 10,000 miles. And on hybrids running mostly on electric power, that can technically work because the engine accumulates fewer combustion cycles. But on conventional drivetrains, especially with short trip driving, fuel dilution and additive depletion accelerate. 5,000 to 7,000 miles is a much safer interval, and the cost of the extra oil change every couple of years is nothing compared to what a worn bearing will cost you. And finally, pay attention to your engine. Listen to it. Modern Toyotas are eerily quiet, which is part of why these issues sneak up on owners. Cold start rattles that last more than a second or two, faint ticking that develops where there was none before, or oil consumption that begins to climb between changes. These are the early signals. They are easy to ignore. The engine still pulls fine. the check engine light stays off, but once an engine starts losing oil or developing top-end noise, the wear is already happening, and waiting will not make it better. Here is the bottom line, the part I tell every customer who asks me this question face to face. Toyota's 0W-8 oil is not a scam. It is not water. It is not poison. The engineering behind it is real. The additives are sophisticated, and in the operating window the engineers designed for, it does its job. But it is also a regulatory compromise dressed up as innovation, with a much narrower margin for error than any oil that came before it. If you are an average commuter driving a hybrid Corolla in moderate weather and changing your oil with quality fluid on a sensible schedule, you will probably be fine. If you are anyone else, you have every right to be cautious, and stepping up to 0W-16 within your manual's allowed range is one of the smartest things you can do for the long-term health of your engine. The dealership will not tell you any of this. They are not allowed to. Their job is to follow factory recommendations, and the factory recommendation is the absolute minimum that meets the regulatory target, not necessarily the best choice for your specific vehicle and your specific driving life. That gap between what is recommended and what is wise, that is where independent mechanics live. That is where this video lives, and that is where your engine's longevity is decided. If this changed how you think about what goes into your engine, hit the like button so more drivers see it. Subscribe if you want more honest breakdowns of what your dealership is not telling you. Drop a comment with your year, model, and what oil you are running. Because the more we share real-world data, the harder it gets for anyone to hide what is really happening inside these engines. Your car is not destroyed. The next decision you make about it might decide whether it lasts 100,000 more miles or 300,000 more. Choose carefully.